Hey guys, before we get started with the episode, I have two announcements I want to make. Number one is I'll be doing a live podcast at Techstar's Startup Week Detroit on June 21st. I'll be interviewing my friend Fares, the founder of MySwimPro. It's going to be kind of the same format that I usually am with the podcast. But it'll be live. We'll be going over, his entrepreneurial journey and different tips and tricks for people there. The second announcement is I have released the Jibs Journal. So the Jibs Journal is a bi-weekly, maybe monthly newsletter that will be sent out every week that kind of cover the tips and tricks that the entrepreneurs go over in the podcasts, some of their best practices, announcements that are coming up, exciting things that are going on, or just things that I'm thinking about. I really want to make this journal useful for people that are subscribed to it. So if you have any feedback on the journal that you feel like you want to give, please send me that feedback. And if you want to sign up for the journal, that will also be in the description.
It's just about getting up and doing it and finding the time, finding the people and making it happen.
You take control and you say, okay, this needs to be done, and you do it.
And you're never ready to start a business. You either do it or you don't.
Welcome to the Jibs Podcast, showcasing Detroit's movers and shakers, bringing you stories that reveal the gusto and grit that's long defined the city and its people. Together, we'll uncover the history and direction of the Motor City, one voice at a time. This is the Jibs Podcast with Jibran Ahmed.
What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 19 of the Jibs Podcast. I am here with Joe Savali, the founder of Love for a Child.
That's right.
How are you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get right into it. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and about your organization?
I am from just outside the Detroit area. Grew up in Macomb County. I'm 33. And I started a Michigan nonprofit called Love for a Child, which is a active 501c3 organization currently. And we started in 2011. So we serve Metro Detroit's foster care system. So all of the children that we are currently helping and the families that we're reaching out to are actively involved in one way or another with the foster care system right here in Michigan.
Yeah. And what brought about you wanting to start this organization?
Yeah, so when I was 18, I was attending a church in St. Clair Shores, Michigan, and I was working at their daycare, as manly as that sounds. And somebody approached me and said, hey, we have this 1 week long camp for severely abused and abandoned children, and we don't have enough male counselors to go. We would love for you to come. And I did everything in my power to not go because at that time I had no money, I was broke, I was living with my parents, and a week off of work meant less of a paycheck. But somehow or another, they did convince me to go. And I was assigned a child from Port Huron, Michigan, who was a severe abuse case. I went in with the intent of, all right, I'm going to give this kid the best week of his life. I'm going to change his life forever, and then go back to what I know best and be very selfish for who I was. But I think the plan I went in with got changed pretty drastically, because after spending 5 days with a kid who has absolutely nothing, it made me realize how selfish I had been living for the first 18 years of my life. And I would like to say there was a life-altering moment that took place at the end of that week, but I think that week planted a seed for what would eventually become Love for a Child years later. So that's kind of where it started when I was 18.
Yeah. And so, that seed was planted, and, that's kind of what you wanted to go into maybe in the future, but how do you come to the point where, okay, I'm going to turn this into an organization that does things?
So over the next 5 or 6 years, I would continue to volunteer at that camp, and I would start to become a little bit more actively or proactively interested in the statistics that these children faced. I would do some research on how many kids are in foster care in Michigan, how many of them are failing out of high school, how many of them are sexually abused, physically abused, mentally handicapped. And I started to realize that there were a lot of resources out there helping children like this, but in very small phases of the year. A Christmas gift, a birthday visitation, maybe the start of school, they would get a backpack with some shoes and a colored pencil package. And I started to realize that these little tangible visits of gifts and things weren't changing the stats. It almost kind of feels like you put a Band-Aid on the wound for a quick moment. And what are these kids, or how are these kids actively going to become better adults if they're not given an opportunity at a young age? So I think when that seed turned into almost kind of this obsession with the statistics, I started to realize, what could little old me even do to possibly change that? And I did nothing for a few years. Very honest with you, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to start a charity. I didn't know the paperwork to file. I didn't know how much money it cost. And I kind of allowed the outside world. Some of my best friends said, Joe, you know, you're in your late 20s. You're a grown man. Why are you going to start a charity for kids? And there's no money involved with that. You can't survive. You can't make a living. So there was also a part of me that wanted to prove them wrong. So I did that. You know, in 2011, I partnered up with a lawyer and an accountant who helped me file the paperwork. And in a short, 4 months, I was an approved charity. And I remember sitting at a Starbucks with a law pad going, what do I do now? How do I even start a program? And I started working with just 2 kids. Once a week, mentoring them, trying to figure out what I could turn a couple kids into 20 or 50. I had no idea, but I think the more important value of that whole thing was that there had to be a moment where I got over the fact that I was fearful, scared, and not knowing of what to do. And so I made a choice to move forward. And whether I liked it or not, I was handed a charity, and I had to prove to at least one child that I could make a difference. And that's kind of where it started.
Yeah.
It's not a most glamorous way of starting, but it's the authentic truth.
And I think that's very real, and I think a lot of people kind of glamorize, starting up a company or a charity or anything. I know personal experience filling out the 102.3 form is horrible.
Yeah, it's 40 pages of Spanish to me. And if I didn't have that accountant helping me, I probably would have taken the easy road and just said, it's not worth it, and backed out. But people believed in my vision, even when my vision wasn't crystal clear.
Right.
And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, and the charity has taken many different variables and phases of life that have changed since 2011. Initially, it started off teaching children music and art as an outlet for them to escape the abuse, escape the neglect, and a lot of foster families can't afford extracurricular programming. So I would provide that for free. Instruments and artwork was donated, and the kids were loving it. But after doing that for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, I started to really understand that there were many sessions where we were there to teach music, and the instrument was never even taken out of the case because the child just wanted to talk. They wanted to express who they were. And there was a moment where they finally felt safe with us. They felt trustworthy of us to spend time with them. And although they're small children, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old, once you've earned that trust with them, their hearts kind of start to become open. And that's when the relationship really begins. And I wanted to be very compassionate about that moment over trying to say, we have a job to do to teach this guitar or piano, or we got to paint on a canvas, and to distract you from what you're going through. Because when the child can self-express who they are and what they've gone through, I think that's part of the healing process.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the past 7 years doing this, what have you seen as the biggest issues in the foster care system as a whole?
Yeah. If you ask 20 different agencies in Michigan how many foster care children are registered in Michigan, I can almost assure you you'll get 20 different answers, and they'll be very different from each other. And I think the biggest challenge has been the foster care system is such an overlooked industry here in our state, and it's so broken, and it's so kind of just an array of chaos that no one is spending individualized attention to try to organize it and fix it. So as quickly as a child is placed in a home, within weeks, within days, that child could be already had pushed into 3 more homes. And the paper trail on these children can never stay consistent because there's no consistency in their life. They're new parents every couple weeks, a new roof over their head every couple months. Paperwork gets lost in translation. I mean, I've met children who don't know their birth date and they're 12 years old. They don't know their actual birth first name because by the time they were 2 and 3 years old, they had been tossed around so much that their paperwork doesn't even exist. So I think the challenges with me wanting to spend time with the kids and give them mentoring and give them our time and give them programming, that's the fun side. The hard, challenging side is working with a discombobulated industry of people who don't really care to try to fix it. And so people say, you know, Joe, do you think you can fix it? I don't think I can fix it anytime soon, but I'm happy to work in the chaos and try to make something make sense in that chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of challenges and obstacles have you faced in growing this organization?
I think as any young entrepreneur, and I sometimes struggle with asking or even titling myself that. Some of my friends say they're impressed with me as an entrepreneur, but and maybe that's because I'm not starting a for-profit business. But let me assure you, to anyone that's going to listen to this, that a nonprofit is a tough work, and it's ran like any other business as far as a structure, as organization, financially, to provide to an industry that is tough. And I think my challenges with myself starting a charity and trying to get it from where it was in 2011 to where we are here now in 18 is I didn't have a massive support team for the first 5 years. I would attend multiple networking events every single week, not even just to collect donations and stuff, but to spread the word of my vision to people that would actually start to slowly be my support team. In the first year, we raised like $4,000, right? And to some people, that's not a lot of money in the big picture. But the average charity in Michigan, their first year maybe raises like $400. And here we are like 6 years later, raising well over $150,000 a year in value. So I have to sometimes take a step back and look at what we've done and go, something must be working. But I look back at the last 6 years and the amount of people I've sat in front of in a Starbucks table, in a networking meeting, in a public speaking opportunity, I would say for like every 50 people I've been in front of, there's 1 or 2 that really understand and capture the vision. And over a 5-year period, those 50 people now start to become in the thousands. And then you realize your support team is still only 40 or 50 people deep, but you've been in front of thousands. And I think as entrepreneurs, we sometimes want to say, I have this great idea, I have all my paperwork filed, and in the first 12 months, if it's not here, I failed. I think if entrepreneurs went in with that thought process, almost 100% of them would have to pull the plug at year one, because it takes time. So I think my biggest challenge was understanding the fact that I wanted to be at a certain place at a certain time, but sometimes you have to just trust the process that I'm in this for the long haul. And 5 years has gone by faster than I'm comfortable with. So, patience.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you have for somebody that wants to start up a small business or a charity or a nonprofit?
I would say due diligence. I've had a few people approach me about wanting to start charities who have a great idea, but they haven't spent, if any time at all, actually working in the demographic that they're interested in. Even for profit, if you want to start up a tech company or a software company, if you want to start an organization in the charity world for the homeless or food prevention and different things, you really got to get your hands dirty. You can do as much research on Google and the internet as you want, and you could have typed out documents, and that's great. But I think that's about 30% of the equation. I think until you dive in full force and you start working with those tech people and making relationships, and you start working in those charitable organizations and handing out food to the homeless and working with food shelters and working in the foster care, once you're in it, you start to organically understand how the developmentation of what you need to do is going to lay out. And no matter how much research you can do from behind a desk or behind of a computer, nothing, I guess it's an old-fashioned approach, nothing will ever outrun or overlay the fact that you've actually went and got your hands dirty, serving those people, starting that company, pouring hours into the hands-on work. And I think a lot of young generation, I'm not going to say all, have this mentality that I have a good idea and I need somebody else just to hand it to me or at least convince me that it's going to work. I see a lot of the younger generation just kind of sitting back with an expectation that they're either owed something or they're not willing to put in the actual amount of work to create it. And it's not, I guess it could be frustrating from my generation's perspective, but that's not going to change unless we really take them under our wings and mentor them even as business owners.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I feel like not enough people live the problem.
Yeah.
And people who do live the problem and have created something around it are usually successful, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, so, people on this podcast understand, I'm 33 now, and I started working with foster care children when I was 18. I didn't choose to do anything with my own charity or even try to solve a problem until I personally was 26 years old. And I'm not saying that people have to dedicate 5 to 10 years as getting their hands dirty on the problem, but I think there is something to be said about giving something of your time for a little while just to be that much better at what you want to do. It's like you could be the best chef in the world, but if you haven't tasted the first 1,000 burgers that you've made to perfect the 1,001, those first 1,000 were just ingredients and a guess. And maybe that's a bad example, but I think that's sometimes what business owners do. They try to pro-advance the steps. How quickly can we advance all these steps so that we can get to where we want to be? And like a chef, sometimes it's just one more ounce of a small detail that makes it picture perfect. But if you try to skip that one detail, you might ruin the whole equation before it ever even got perfect. Yeah. And so that's a weird analogy to apply to charity, but from day one having that 1023 paperwork that said I was a charity to where we are now, every single day in between has been a small detail that has let our organization realize what we're doing good and what we could be getting better at. And I like to focus on what can we be getting better at, because the good will stay consistent and we'll keep acting on that. But you gotta love to fail. It's the only way you learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Just a few more questions.
Yeah.
So what motivates you every single day to get up and do this thing?
Probably my favorite question. I personally I went to school out west for music and video engineering. And for a few years, I would sit in marketing and advertising companies behind a computer all day long, 6 inches from a computer screen, mentally unhealthy, physically unhealthy, go home exhausted in these million and billion dollar a year companies that I was working with would never know my name. They would never know the project I was working on, and they would continue to make millions of dollars. And what they did with their money, to me, was kind of useless. And when I really started to have a passion for working with kids, underprivileged kids specifically, there was one specific incident. I shouldn't say incident. There was a child who came into my life 10 years ago, almost to the day, who reminded me a lot of myself. He was an abuse victim. His mother was in jail. He had lost his father. He had been left alone at the age of 10 in a home for weeks upon weeks. Not necessarily left to die, but just forgotten about. A 10-year-old kid living in fear. And this child came to one of our programs, and I couldn't understand why he was there. He was sweet, he was innocent, he was respectful. And fast forwarding this story, I had a conversation with him on this little lake in North Rochester, where we sat on this rock and we looked at the lake and we talked for like an hour together. And when I walked away from that conversation, in my mind, I said, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm fulfilling some type of purpose. Wouldn't it be cool if I could go to work every single day where I get to be a kid and hang out and kick a kickball and do arts and crafts and talk with these children and learn what they want and hang out and essentially just live the life of a kid every day. I know that sounds kind of funny for being 33 years old, but that's why everybody talked me out of this. They were like, Joe, you can't go on any type of job application and be like, apply to be a kid at the age 30. Like, you don't get paid for that. It doesn't exist. Like, go get a real job. So there was a part of my probably pride that kicked in at that moment and said, I want to do this for the right reasons, but I also want to prove people wrong, that if you really are passionate about something and you're willing to live, sweat, and bleed it, it can make it work. And to finish that story, I would continue to hang out with that child for the next 10 years. Yeah. That very child is now going to be 20 in just a couple of months. And he's actually our honorary counselor for this year. So he is coming with us to our program this August to serve the very children in foster care that he once was when he was 10, when we met him. And it's kind of scary to put it all in perspective that it's been 10 years. But I think if the charity shut down tomorrow and this whole thing collapsed, if I was set in this life to meet that 10-year-old and spend 10 years with him so that he could understand what he could do with his life, then I feel like part of my purpose was fulfilled.
Yeah, that's amazing. What are you really excited about that Love for a Child is doing in the next year, 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah. Since day one, I've always wanted to understand how we could really partner with the state of Michigan to expand our funding options. This upcoming June 18th, after 3 years of hard work, we've started to preliminary meet with certain private foundations in Michigan that are interested in funding our efforts for massive growth expansion across Macomb, Wayne, and Oakland counties. I think that brings a lot of excitement, not because the financial numbers will grow, it's the outreach of families that will be directly affected by that growth. Our personal staff will grow. Our office is located in Auburn Hills, Michigan. We're partnered with an amazing prevention organization called the Alliance of Coalitions for Healthy Communities. And so if this funding starts to really happen, people will get jobs, families will directly be affected for the positive, and the amount of children will double or triple in size in 2019 that we can directly help with mentoring and programming and camps. And to think that we started with one child 6 years ago and could be helping several hundred next year, I think that was the plan all along. So that's exciting for us.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, cool. For people listening or for people watching, where can they find you if they want to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of us is to visit us online at our web, which is loveforachild.org. There you can understand all of our programming, who we are as an organization, find a way to donate as well, or get involved helping from a mentoring perspective with one of our programs, visit one of our camps, or just look at some of our media to see exactly what we're doing right here in Metro Detroit. And our office is located in Auburn Hills, Michigan. You can find the address on the website if you wanted to send us mail or get more information as well.
Cool, brother. Appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody listening, until next time, stay tuned.
Thank you.
Cool, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, man. It's fun.